Well, let's talk about what is Web3 and what excites you about it, because you've really jumped in like head first and you're really deep into it. I'm curious, thinking about from the perspective of this show, like what excites you about it for creators, and what is it exactly?
Yeah. So I will also admit early to this, documenting my discovery of it and my in the same way that Visualize Value began as me sort of churning back out ideas that I was consuming. That's the same process I'm undergoing now with Web3. And there's a lot of incredibly smart people that have been in this space longer than I have, that I put together a thread a few weeks ago. If anyone's interested in it, I'll pin it after this so you can go and find it. But Web3, again, a buzzword that is used to sort of encapsulate so many different things, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I would say my interpretation of it is a shift in incentive structures on the internet. So if Web 2 was about distributing on platforms that are owned by these giga corporations, right? Where you're basically making a deal with a Twitter or a Facebook in that you will generate attention for them and basically increase their market cap by getting eyeballs on their platform so they can sell ads or whatever else it is that they're selling. And you kind of okay with that deal because you can use those eyeballs to build relationships and grow your business or whatever else. So Web3, what the fundamental difference is, in my mind, is that there's this way less friction to owning certain pieces of certain networks, and how that changes the behavior and the upside for creators is incredibly interesting. So it's all nascent right now, and there's a lot of noise and crazy stuff. You'll see Silver Lion Club, whatever the hell avatar project is going on, right?
Yeah.
But fundamentally, what's interesting about Web3 is the idea of shared ownership and upside.
Yes.
And the idea that you as a creator now don't have to go and start from zero and be like, hey, I'm an animator. Can somebody please pay me to animate something? I will painstakingly put out 900 pieces of animation in the hope that I'm going to catch the eye of somebody, right? What Web3 enables now, and the way internet culture is shifting, is that these companies or these collectives or these groups, these membership groups, are open to anyone. You may not own a piece of them, but you can go into the Discord of any of these owned communities, whether it's a platform that's building on crypto or an avatar project or a decentralized movie studio, game company, whatever it is. You can go in and watch and see what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a lot of top-down capital coming into the space because there's people that have been invested in Ethereum since 2014 or whenever the Ethereum pre-mine was, that are just giga millionaires. And this is a minute marketing expense for them to fund. And obviously there's some people do it because they love doing it, but it also makes a ton of sense to grow the ecosystem. So as a creator, you can plug into these things and you have almost instant product market feedback loop that you can plug into instantly. So if you're an animator and you go into Bored Ape Yacht Club, you're like, hey, I just animated this short of these 5 characters interacting, whatever.
Yeah.
There are people that have a vested interest in growing the market cap of that community, growing increasing the quality of the relationships between that community. So instead of you trying to break, and the narrative you'll see is Web3 gets rid of gatekeepers and crypto gets rid of gatekeepers, right? This is the grand vision for crypto, is the middleman slowly loses power over time.
Right.
And the idea that as a creator, you can start to identify and contribute to networks without permission. You could do that in Web3, but you wouldn't be able to buy a piece of it.
Yeah.
Just without permission, just be I'm buying into this project. I think it's cool. And then I'm going to start contributing to growing the value of this thing, right? If I think Mirror is an amazing platform, I can start publishing on Mirror. And actually, maybe this is not the best example, but a lot of these protocols are offering you can buy pieces of those platforms in public markets.
Yeah.
So the idea that everyone becomes like an investor and everyone's portfolio, like everyone's creative portfolio is actually aligned with their financial portfolio in a lot of ways. That to me is extremely exciting. I don't think it's this promise that everybody's going to make a ton of money by any means, but I think it's a definite shortcut and network effect. Like I've seen so many just obscenely talented people that are just not great marketers. And if they wasted 30 hours a week marketing, they wouldn't be as good at what they did, right?
Right.
3D artists, people that come to mind are just like insanely dedicated to their craft. And this is like these positive sum networks where you can bring people in and everyone can contribute, grow the value of the network together. And it shifts the incentives in a way where you're not competing against another designer in a Web2 company. Like even in my advertising days, it's which art director and copywriter is going to come up with the best campaign.
Right. Yeah.
And these guys that didn't come up with it, they're not going to get the next pitch, right? Versus a Web3 thing where maybe you own a piece of the protocol. You're like, I'm desperate for the best thing to win because it's going to have a material effect on my ownership of the, the overall protocol. So yeah, it's like just a slight shift. And well, I say a slight shift, it's a huge shift, but from the outside, it looks like a slight shift.
Sure.
Right? And I think there's a lot of people, especially creative people, that have been reading narratives about in particular that are like, this is a complete Ponzi scheme, nonsensical thing. But what it really is like, we talked about internet identity and you being a native citizen of the internet. It's you being rewarded for one, your contribution, but two, just your taste. If you can predict the virality of something, or if you can understand that this asset is going to generate X amount of attention over X amount of time, then you basically place a bet on that. Like, right. That's another critique of it, that it's just a massive casino. But what is any market really? It's abstracted. It is a gamble, but this is just going to be way more volatile, obviously, because people can participate completely anonymously, and there's a lot more due diligence that you should be doing as a participant of these markets. But it's also, I think, like a once in a generation technology shift where you can, position yourself in a really compelling way as a creative. I think there's all these arbitrage opportunities in that world because it's so technical, and the people that have been in that world and have excelled in that world to date have been the back end builders of the tech. If you go on a lot of these, I don't know if you ever mess about with DeFi or anything like that, but some of these protocols, you go on the website, like this is like the Starship Enterprise, man. I have no idea where to start. Yeah. And that arbitrage opportunity for a UI designer, UX designer, a writer, an illustrator to explain this stuff, there's just this big shift in, this transition, I think, presents a massive opportunity for creative people to own upside in their contribution. I'm actually going to try and put together something on this that's just, I don't claim to be a technical genius around any of this stuff, but trying to just point people in the direction of maybe philosophically, if you shift your perspective slightly, then you can position yourself differently. And the idea of permissionless work now doesn't need to be this like complete, you're not completely winging it, right? You're not like investing your time in doing something that might be ignored. It's like you have a captive audience. You make something, you literally drop it in the Discord channel of the company that is developing the technology. The right people are going to see it. And it's different than spamming Twitter, like spamming in the Twitter replies. So I just think it's a big shift. I think there's a lot of promise for people who jump on it. Yeah,
I agree. Like the guest before you, his name's Jeremy. He's like this amazing photographer. He does portrait photography. And right at the end of the episode, I was like, so what should people look out for? And he's like, I'm dropping a whole series of NFTs. I've never gotten into the space, but that's the next big step for me. And it just is like becoming abundantly clear. there's something real going on here. I do feel like the accessibility part, like I even think a lot of what you just said, I think a lot of people won't know what a lot of, even me, I don't even know what a lot of it is. I think like that Twitter thread you had mentioned that you've been putting together about what you've learned and where to learn things. That's for sure a cool place for people to start. But I'm curious about what do you feel like some misconceptions are that you feel like you had mentioned, like people calling NFTs a Ponzi scheme. What are some misconceptions around it that you feel like you disagree with, or you feel like are incorrect what are your convictions around it?
Sure. I think one thing is like digital ownership is not valuable, right? I think this idea of you can't own property that's on the internet. And I think that misconception comes from, it's always been this way, or you don't actually have a understanding of how the internet currently works because you are contributing to a network that somebody else owns right now. There's a really interesting disconnect where you can make a violent criticism of something, but you don't actually understand the other side of the argument, or you haven't thought about how that changes what you're saying. So by saying artists shouldn't sell their creative work, you're actually saying artists should grow the market cap of Twitter and Facebook and sell prints for $7.50 versus have collectors invest in their work and build a valuable network. There's definitely a lot of misconceptions around the Ponzi scheme or being around collectors in the space. Like I said, there's people that have been invested in Ethereum for an incredibly long time, and this is like a really exciting cultural moment that they view as significant as the Renaissance period,
sure.
Like digital art and ownership of these just incredibly significant cultural objects. And people compare that to Beanie Babies, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There's some good precedents for that. Like a lot of these like collectibles and collections that are just being spun up in 10 hours or whatever people are doing, hiring someone on Fiverr and dropping the thing and then just running off. Like any market, there's going to be nonsense.
Sure.
But this is just, the response is just way more crazy because there's so much money involved and it moves so fast and it's this big liquid network that's all over the world. But some of the things I think will continue to shock us in just outrageous ways. Like
yeah.
I don't think people really understand the size of, if you look at a financial market, like how much volume is being traded on any given financial market on any given day. It's hard to even wrap your head around conceptually what's going on. $1 million NFT sale is nothing.
Right.
It's just like in the grand scheme of how much money moves around the world on a daily basis, it's nothing. And to a middle-class person in any country in the world, it's ludicrous. But in terms, like if you actually contextualize it around what it is, which is like a global market for this thing with finite supply, and 10% of the active participants in that market have a 9-figure net worth. It's like, okay, it makes total sense.
Right.
Like, if you zoom out enough, you start to understand why it's happening. And then I think, again, people misunderstand or undervalue attention, and how attention is like the most powerful force in the world. Some of the most Apple is the most valuable private company on the planet. Yes, they make nice phones, but why does everybody want an iPhone? So they have this like little portal that they can stare into every day at what their friends are doing, what their friends think of them. Like they communicate with their colleagues, all the things you use an iPhone for. It's like the critique that digital things aren't real. It's like, okay, so every interaction, every time you touch your iPhone, nothing real is happening. Like you can extrapolate that logic and challenge it that way. And I just don't believe that to be true. And that's another great contextual point is Fortnite, the skins that they sell in Fortnite. I think that's a $2 billion a year marketplace.
Wow.
And Fortnite takes 100% of that. You don't own any of those items as a player of Fortnite. You just literally are emptying probably your parents' credit card in most cases into Fortnite LLC's bank account versus hey, I was here on this day and I got this digital asset and now I can trade that. I don't know if you ever played RuneScape or
I never did. No, I didn't.
But a lot of these people that are like massively into these Ethereum in particular and all of these like market protocols, they played games. Like it's like magic internet money is not an exaggeration, because a lot of people just learn coordination and like place value on items along like 10 years ago, and these like transactions are happening digitally, and you could make the argument like, yeah, that's in-game currency. But again, going back to the start of the conversation, it's like we're almost playing like a remote job or remote work is a video game.
Totally.
And for people that have reached a certain point in the Maslow's hierarchy, I'm not saying that you need to have your bases covered, right? Your food, your shelter, your air, and then for people that aren't worried about any of those things, is it any surprise that they're like messing about, buying pictures of monkeys off each other on the internet? It's like
buying rocks.
Really surprise me.
JPEGs of rocks.
Surprise me.
I know. Yeah.
And that's, like I said, I think we're just at the beginning of it, and crazy stuff. But there are people that are way more articulate than I am at describing this stuff. I think I can gather that information. And I actually had this idea this morning. I might set up another, like, make it free or donation based so someone can maintain it, but set up just a little course that goes through some of these principles and get some resources for people to follow.
That'd be cool.
The thought leaders that are actually building in this space.
Yeah, that'd be cool. One thing that I like to think about, and you could tell me this might be totally off and it might be like not completely aligned with what like NFTs and Web3 is all about. But one example I think of a lot when I talk to people about this or when I've heard skepticism is the first thing that comes to my mind are domain names. Like I own alexsug.com. No one else owns that. And that's like digital real estate that actually really counts. Like I remember when they made the app extension .app. I just I went into Hover and I bought Harry Potter.app, Nike.app, and I bought all these things. And of course I got flagged and I wasn't allowed to do it. But in my mind, it's like there's this level of digital ownership that's really valuable, even in a domain name. And that's been going on for decades, where people are buying and selling domains across to each other. And it's like letters on a screen like that. Like it's not quote unquote real at all. This is all just a big story we're telling ourselves. And that's a huge part about like real money too. Like I think, especially over the last year and a half, like I do feel like at the end of the day, the crypto world, NFT world is just, it's a narrative that's a response to another narrative that people think
100%.
And it's just all about, I think it becomes very complicated sounding because it is technically more complicated than what we're used to. But I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to, are we telling a newer, better story of this digital currency online versus what has been in the past?
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, especially like the domain thing for digital ownership and the complexity of the money story. Also, money in a traditional sense is incredibly complicated. Just nobody has a clue how it works.
Right.
And if you start to, like, I think what crypto does is you start to ask questions about like, why do you need hard capped money? What do you mean? And then you really start to get into the world of, oh, okay, somebody came up with this. Everything is a human invention. Like nothing is absolute. And then guess the crypto argument, and especially the case of Bitcoin, is like, well, we have figured out absolute money, and this is what we believe is going to eventually trump every other form of money. And I have no prediction or opinion there, but I do think all of these technologies and all of these stories just lead people to basically finding out that things don't have as rigorous of a...
Yeah.
You especially when you're like an entrepreneur, you're operating your own business, or you break out of this world where you just, certain things you accept and you don't dig into deeper because it's just have no reason to, right? You have no reason to like get any more intimate with the details. Or in my case, I'm talking about that. And then when you do, it's like a rabbit hole. It's just a complete rabbit hole. And you realize, okay, emperor's got no clothes in a lot of cases. So we're just going to see what happens. Like just follow the stuff that interests you. And it's just, and it's getting crazy out there. The internet, there's a video of David Bowie. You ever seen the David Bowie's prediction of what the internet?
I did. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he's spot on. It's like you have not even began to understand the implications of the internet, and I think these are like the cracks are starting to show, where it's like the things that everybody accepted as like absolute truths are now like, oh no, there's a dude that invented new money that just like
right,
this guy in San Francisco. What?
Right.
Like 10 years ago, you would say that's impossible. And 10 years from now, we'll look back at this and be like, we were just talking nonsense, right? We didn't know what the hell was.
Right. For sure.